What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Wrestling with Johners. This is episode 115, and today is a bit of a special episode for us. Usually about this time you'll be hearing me and a guest talking about the action on the weekly AEW Dynamite or NXT. We've decided that because wrestling is in a bit of a strange situation at the moment, with the world kind of experiencing the coronavirus and everything that kind of goes along with it, that we'll switch things up. And of course, we're on the road to WrestleMania. We're just a week away from WrestleMania weekend, and that's of course been affected by COVID-19, and of course WrestleMania has been split into 2 days, whether it be from the Performance Center or Full Sail or various locations. Who knows? We'll have to watch on the 4th and 5th of April to find out what's going on. But we thought, because we're all getting excited about WrestleMania, that we'll review a retro WrestleMania. So I kind of threw it out there to the Facebook followers on the Wrestling with Johners Facebook community group. And my two guests got involved in that as well. And we had a poll. We had a poll between WrestleMania 8, WrestleMania 18 and WrestleMania 28. And WrestleMania 8 from 1992 won the poll. So I want to introduce my guests. So we've got Chris and we've got Nick from the Broken But Glorious Wrestling podcast on Skype. So Chris and Nick, good evening. How are you both? And thank you for coming on the Wrestling with Johners podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having us. I'm very well, thank you.
Oh, it's fantastic to have you both on, and I want to allow you kind of an opportunity to talk about your podcast, about the various features you do, what you cover, how often you drop your episodes. But first of all, we have Mags from Badlands podcast on the podcast fairly often. We've had him about 3 or 4 times now.
Yeah, I've had him on.
He's a great guy. He's a great guy. But Mags has kind of described Broken But Glorious Wrestling podcast as the pioneers of the British wrestling podcast landscape. So
very nice about us.
How does that? That's a hell of a compliment coming from Mags. And Mags is an excellent content creator, an excellent podcaster. But coming from Mags, a great compliment. Pioneers, gentlemen. Tell us about Broken But Glorious and what my listeners can experience if they decide to tune into your brilliant podcast and all your content.
So we started in 2017, wasn't it?
Yeah, 2017. It was around the Great Balls of Fire.
Oh, we started as Great Balls of Fire. Yes, we actually started as a football podcast. 2013. And about 2017, after I just did the general election, Nick was itching to do a wrestling podcast, and I said, well, we'll just do it. And got Great Balls of Fire coming up. We'll just review that. I don't know where Broken But Glorious. It was kind of Matt Hardy and Bobby Roode were kind of huge at the time.
It's a great name for a podcast. It really stands out, and like I say, your logo is a very colourful kind of lucha mask. Broken But Glorious. It kind of, everybody can relate to that, especially if they're wrestling fans, being a Matt Hardy fan or Bobby Roode. But tell us about the type of content that you drop every week, and because you do multiple shows, you cover multiple topics. Tell us a bit more.
Well, the main show we record it on a Tuesday, it comes out late Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. We tend to start with the general news of the week, then we have a bit of a quiz, and then we have a main topic, which is either a review of a pay-per-view, maybe a preview, or just whatever the big news is that week. We'll just discuss like a 20-minute debate on whatever that is, and then we have another quiz, the final of the quiz, and then usually finish it with a debate.
Well, there we go. Quizzes and debates.
Maybe a quiz and debates. But yeah, the last bit it's a bit more formal, where we usually have like a minute to put your arguments across, and then sometimes we put it to Twitter and they vote on who won. And yeah, it started off as we just reviewed pay-per-views, but as it's gone on, we've added bits onto it, and then October last year. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I was going to say, do you do live content? Do you do any live podcasts at all? Because that seems to be quite popular at the moment.
No, I don't think I'm confident enough to do a live podcast at the moment.
Yeah, because we're looking into it here. We're looking into the Wrestling with Johners podcast. Something that we want to dabble with in the future. You know, you see like a Foul Original and Smart to Death and so many others do live podcasts. The Solid Monster, of course, he's my favourite. But yeah, something that might be just to shake things up in the future. But what can my listeners look forward to from the Broken but Glorious Wrestling podcast in the coming weeks? I know that you're always busy. You're doing multiple interviews. There's lots of indie wrestlers out there that are kind of free at the moment, twiddling their thumbs, dare I say, wanting to be kind of spoken to by podcasters, a bit of extra exposure for them. But what can my listeners kind of look forward to from your podcast over the next week or so?
So next week, we were meant to do it this week. We're doing a playlist of WrestleMania matches to get you through it, to help you survive the Corona lockdown. So we're doing that next Tuesday. The following Tuesday, we'll have the WrestleMania review, and then the one after that, we're going to do our perfect WrestleMania card. So you can pick any WrestleMania match, but it has to be whatever the best WWE matches, and then we'll have. But you have a match from one WrestleMania, and the guy can't appear more than once on the pay-per-view. So that's gonna. It's easy. It's a good concept in my head, but whether I can say it out loud at the moment, that's my idea at the moment. It's going to be the perfect WrestleMania card.
Yeah. I think the thing with these is just to have fun and conversation, really, isn't it? It just kind of it kind of starts with a small idea, then it kind of basically these conversations snowball into weird and wonderful kind of directions. But as long as you're talking about wrestling, that's what people want to hear, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, we've got plenty of interviews coming up the next week. Last couple of weeks I've had Daredevil Dave Dahl on. He was part of that. Part of the Retro Mania game coming out. And they had that Retro Mania tournament where an indie wrestler could get onto the game, which was won by Warhorse. He was part of that, so I had him on the other week. Kyle Kingsley, British wrestling star, on last week. Freddie Brack has returned. It's his second interview. We interviewed him yesterday. He came on. We released that this morning. Got Royce Isaacs later this evening. That'll be out next week. Richard Holiday on Monday, and then Jason from the For Love of Wrestling event is coming on to explain, because that's recently been cancelled, so he's come on to talk about the future plans, when it's going to be reorganised. Yeah, it's got a lot, loads of people.
Lots to look forward to. But
sometimes just.
Let's kind of focus on WrestleMania VIII then. So I was speaking to you both a little bit off air. Now, Chris, you kind of were growing up around the 80s and the 90s, and you remember watching WrestleMania VIII when you were younger. But Nick, now we found out off air that watching WrestleMania VIII this week was your first experience of WrestleMania VIII. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're spot on. First time watching WrestleMania VIII this week. As I say, not to give away too much of my age, but I sort of first time watching wrestling sort of 2001, 2002 time, when you're sort of a little boy and you're allowed to sort of watch your pay-per-views for the first time. So we're talking WrestleMania 7, WrestleMania 17, WrestleMania 18 sort of time, where I broke on the scene, so to speak. So no, it's always good though going back and watching obviously a lot of classic pay-per-views when I hear sort of from mates from all over, and they're saying, you need to go back and watch this on the network. So when yourself and Chris told me to go and sort of said this was the one we're going to be reviewing, it was really interesting to go back and watch it. As I say, some very good matches that I'm really excited to talk about when we sort of get into it. So no, it's just a very good WrestleMania, and as I say, certainly one that it's sort of hard to compare it with ones that I sort of see now when you sort of look at your more modern day really great WrestleManias like your WrestleMania 30, more so because I think the fact now that obviously I wasn't invested in storylines building up to WrestleMania 8, it's hard to have that sort of emotional connection, if that makes sense, with a kind of match, as opposed to when you're watching it, sort of you're more watching it just to sort of see the classic matches, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris, yourself, like I say, you do remember watching it back in the day, back in 1992. Did watching it back this week kind of bring back kind of warm, fuzzy memories for you?
Oh yeah, we in our house we watch a lot of it. So my girlfriend also is a huge of the new gen era, so we watch a lot of early 90s. But yeah, I love WrestleMania 8.
Yeah.
It's a weird one, because it's not quite like rock and roll, the rock and wrestling era. and it's not quite new gen. It's kind of in the middle, and they're trying to not quite know what they want to do yet, because they know that Hogan's going to leave soon. And they're like, but we've got Ric Flair as the champion, but we've been telling you for years that everybody outside WWE is rubbish, but we've got to keep this guy looking great. What do we do? And then we've got all these good brand new wrestlers coming through, who like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker. It's like we need to put them over, and then which I think they do on their show really well. So.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Hall of Famers of nowadays, the legends of nowadays, like the Bret Harts, the Shawn Michaels, the Undertakers. This is kind of when they were kind of just breaking through as singles wrestlers. Obviously, we're familiar with Shawn Michaels as part of the Rockers, and he had his infamous split with Marty Jannetty, which we'll talk about in his match with Tito Santana shortly. But and then you had Bret Hart. He'd been a singles wrestler within the WWF for a year or so, and he had that great match at SummerSlam '91 with Mr. Perfect, of course, and that's kind of when he broke onto the scene in the singles ranks. But I suppose you go back the previous 5 or 6 years, and he was more famous as being one half of the Hart Foundation with Jim Neidhart.
Even at WrestleMania VII, he was in the tag team match, wasn't he? So,
absolutely, yeah. Can't remember who they were up against, but you're spot on. And then, of course, this is the Undertaker's only second WrestleMania. I think he'd only been with the company a year and a half, but we'll talk more about kind of where the Undertaker was at this point in his career, 1992, when we get to his match. But like I say, each match was really, really kind of unique in its own way. But like I say, I think looking back on it, there's lots of things that still fill me with warm, fuzzy memories and kind of definitely. excellent matches. But there's also some things that kind of make you want to scratch your head and wonder why they made that decision and why they took that decision. But we'll talk about that as the episode goes. But I think the most iconic thing as we kind of started WrestleMania 8 was the introduction to the show by Vince McMahon and his really big voice. And he's done this on many pay-per-views, especially when he introduces all the wrestlers for Royal Rumbles, and he did the same here for the double main event WrestleMania. I'd love to do my Vince McMahon voice, but my throat hasn't quite been what it used to be. No. But big kind of roaring WrestleMania, and that you're kind of onto something special. Then there's like the opening a view from the camera of the Hoosier Dome. There was 67,167 people in the Hoosier Dome, or at least that's the figure that the WWF gave us at the time. It was on April the 5th, 1992. So straight away we had Gorilla Monsoon, Bobby the Brain Heenan. They were our commentary team. And before we get into the matches, guys, just got to talk about their chemistry. I mean, whenever they were together on the commentary team, it was always evident. And we had it the Royal Rumble
'92. Time they were together on a show?
Well, it could have been. It could have been, yeah. But
it was Gorilla Monsoon's last WrestleMania, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but because I mean, if you think back to WrestleMania 9, you had Heenan, Macho Man, and Jim Ross, didn't you?
Yes.
So I suppose somewhere between WrestleMania 8 and WrestleMania 9, they must have kind of that partnership or duo must have come to an end. I know that Vince McMahon was on a lot more of the pay-per-views going through 1992.
SummerSlam '92 was that Roddy Piper and Vince McMahon?
No, that was Heenan and Vince McMahon. Yeah. Heenan, You could be right. This possibly was the last big WWF pay-per-view with Gorilla and Bobby. And let's be honest, it was a hell of a swan song if this was their last one
I think
together.
This is definitely one of my favourite Bobby Heenan commentaries. It's just he's great throughout. It's just his lusting after Lex Luger and that bit, and just how he's so for Flair. And even in the Roddy Piper Bret match, he was just supporting whoever was being the heelist at the time. Wasn't supporting either one of them really, but he'll just cheer when one of them does a bit of a healy thing. But he's brilliant throughout the whole show.
But the comedy from Bobby Heenan in this one was just off the charts, to be honest with you, and definitely my all-time favourite commentary kind of duo. And I know a lot of people go for Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler and and others, but would these two kind of be up there for you two gents?
These are mine. It's either these, or I also like Vince and Jesse Ventura from the '80s. But I think these are my two favourites. Ross and the King. I didn't watch the Attitude Era, so I don't have the nostalgia for them as much as many people do. So,
Nick, have you got a favourite commentary duo?
Yeah, I think mine will always be just the King and JR. Just simply going back, as I say, to the going back in the day, but growing up, and it's almost like the voices of your childhood in a way. But also as well, I'm a big fan of JR and Paul Heyman when Paul Heyman had the year on commentary.
Good shout.
I did really like Heyman on commentary for the year. Then obviously I keep watching that segment back on YouTube where Heyman sort of gets fired after Survivor Series, and then the King returns and everything. So
yeah.
And again, it was just quite a nice sort of end to kind of the polite feud in a way between JR and Heyman for the whole year. But no, I think it'll always be King. But again, the commentary though for this, it was absolutely fantastic. And if I was to go back before my time for old school, then 100% it would be Heenan and Monsoon for 100% sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, kind of throughout the opening segment, Bobby Heenan, he was on the lookout for this giant centerfold pull-out of Elizabeth that Ric Flair had promised he would display across the Hoosier Dome. I love that kind of storyline and the build to this world title match. But did you gents know that the original main event to WrestleMania VIII wasn't going to be a double main event as we got here? It was going to be Ric Flair versus Hulk Hogan for the WWF title to see who was the true real world champion, you could say. You obviously had the legendary Ric Flair finally coming to the WWF after spending all of his career pretty much the face of the NWA. And then Hogan, he'd brought the mainstream kind of audience into the wrestling world with the Rock and Wrestle, and he was the face of the WWF. And many thought that the path was Ric Flair versus Hulk Hogan as the main event to this year's Mania. But do you know the reason why that main event was pulled before kind of going ahead with that one for Mania 8?
He's recording Mr. Nanny, wasn't he? So he was going to be off telly for a long time.
Yeah, I think that was part of the reason. The other reason I was informed was that I think they had a massive kind of house show run, Hogan and Ric Flair on kind of the house show circuit. And although it was kind of billed as this kind of big kind of, big champions kind of match, Hogan Flair kind of dream match, it didn't really resonate with the fans. And Vince McMahon thought, well, it wasn't resonating with the fans. I don't think it'll resonate. It might do well as a Mania match. It might kind of, be popular as a Mania match, but it's not resonating with the fans. So it's not resonating with me. Let's switch things up. I mean, just kind of fancy booking. I know we saw Flair versus Hogan in the WCW kind of days back in the mid 90s, but do you think it would have worked back in 92?
Do you want to go first, Nick?
No, you go, mate.
Oh, I think it would be a complete clash of egos. It depends whether who. I say I love the Macho Man Flair match so much, so I can't imagine it not being on it. But I think it must work. It'll be a lot of hot dog in the beginning. I can't see it being a classic match, but I think it'll be a brilliant. I think it'll be a very similar build to how the Hulk Hogan Warrior was, where it wasn't a classic match, but it's still remembered as this epic moment in time.
Yeah.
But whether Hogan's ego would let Ric Flair win the match, if he knew he was going off to film this film, would he submit, or would it have to be like a dodgy finish with Ric Flair, with Mr. Perfect getting involved? Loads of people running in. I can't see it being a classic. So, yeah.
I don't know whether it would be a classic, but I think as well, in terms of a main event of WrestleMania as well. I mean, you look at sort of eras as well. I put it. You got those sort of the Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, the Rock, Stone Colds. I think Flair and Hogan's just yet another one that I think as to main event, whether it's a classic or not, sometimes if the matches doesn't live up to the expectations, it's kind of someone gets a free pass in a way, just simply down to the rivalry attached to it and just almost the era sort of rivalry that goes with it.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on.
Throughout the whole card, though, if you just watched it pay-per-view by pay-per-view, they'll build into Macho Man versus Jake the Snake. They'll build in Undertaker Sid. Would have been LOD versus Natural Disasters. Would have been Marty Jannetty versus Shawn Michaels.
Marty Jannetty,
they'll build into all these other matches, and then you get to WrestleMania, and there's none of these matches are on the card. You're like, what's happened to it?
Yeah.
So if you weren't regularly watching the TV show, you'd be like, what's happened to all these feuds that have been building for the last 6 months?
Yeah, and when you look at some of the matches that we did have kind of on paper, they do seem like quite odd pairings, don't they? And like you say, they obviously did have another card planned originally because of all the natural feuds that were building through the back end of 1991 into 1992. But
Yeah.
just before we get into kind of the main card, there were a couple of dark matches. I don't know if you were aware, but they did have the Bushwhackers versus the Beverly Brothers, and they did also have the British Bulldog versus the Berserker. Now, I remember them being kind of promoted and advertised in the build-up to WrestleMania 8, but they didn't actually show on the card. And I was quite disappointed they weren't on the pay-per-view, and I was thinking, well, what happened to the matches? But they did actually have the matches as dark matches. They did record them, and I do remember seeing them on episodes of Superstars a week or so after WrestleMania, as recorded from the Hoosier Dome. So that might be worth going out and searching them. But yes, the Beverly Brothers versus the Bushwhackers. I'm sure that was an all-time classic. And the British Bulldog versus the Berserker, which was a match I was looking forward to because, of course, coming from the UK, everybody was Davey Boy Smith mad back in the early 90s. So I don't know if you knew that, gents.
I didn't know they were recorded. I knew that. I thought Bulldog versus Berserker got bumped for time because it's still on the back. I've got the original VHS from like 1992, and it's still advertised on the back of the VHS. That Bulldog versus Berserker's on the card.
Yeah, I distinctly remember seeing it.
I've never seen it.
Yeah,
I might have watched it back in the day, but I don't remember.
But let's get stuck into the main card then, guys. So the first match was El Matador Tito Santana versus Shawn Michaels with Sherry Martel, and obviously Shawn Michaels was fairly new into his singles run, and Sherry Martel was actually singing his entrance music. Now we obviously know from over the last 20, 30 years that it's Shawn Michaels that's singing his entrance music. But for the first year or so, while Sherry was managing Shawn, it was Sherry Martel on kind of the vocals to Sexy Boy. But that was quite interesting and quite nice to listen to that back when we were watching this match. But let's say this was Shawn's...
a bit nice.
Yeah. But this was Shawn's big WrestleMania singles debut match after turning his back on Marty Jannetty. We mentioned that earlier, putting him through the barbershop window a couple of months earlier. This match, as we mentioned,
was segments.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was going to be originally Shawn Michaels versus Marty Jannetty, but after what happened at the barbershop, but Jannetty was fired from the company before WrestleMania after getting into a real-life fight with a police officer or taking a break away from the company to sell the barbershop angle. So I don't know if you knew that, but while he was selling what happened to him on the barbershop, he actually got fired for getting into a fight with a police officer. So strange occurrences there. And I think Marty Jannetty has always been his kind of his own worst enemy, to be honest with you. In the
long run, it was probably better for him because when he came back, Shawn Michaels was IC champion, wasn't he? So he got into an IC feud, title feud when he came back. So in the long run, it probably worked out a lot better for him. But it was weird.
It was, but Tito Santana, he'd been with the company for many, many years before this WrestleMania, but had recently adopted the El Matador character in an attempt to make himself a little bit more interesting. And of course, this was the era of wild, wacky, over-the-top characters. Unfortunately for Tito, I don't think the character really did much for him. He was still as bland as ever, to be honest with you. But give us your thoughts, kind of watching this match back, gents, on kind of what you thought. I'll pick up on some of the highlights in a minute, but watching this match back, kind of what was your thoughts? And for you, Chris, first of all, bringing back memories of 28 years ago.
It brings back a lot. There was the great Bobby Heenan saying when Reba McEntire was coming out, he said, "Oh, that's his sister," and that made me giggle. So I remember giggling that when I was little. But yeah, I loved the Ultimate Matador gimmick when I was 10.
Yeah.
The match itself, you could tell that Shawn Michaels hadn't quite found his character yet. That there was a lot of headlocks in the match, which for an opener you want it to be a fast pace. Let's get the crowd pumping. But it was a bit. I think there was 3 or 4. It's a 10 minutes match, and I think there was 4 rest spots in the whole thing. Yeah. And there was the super kick was just a transition move. Back then, he had like a backdrop or a back suplex was his finisher, which is dead weird. But I think it was a great way of putting over this is the old era, this is the 80s, and this is who we want to push forward. So you get an old IC champ, and the guy you want to push, put them together, and then people. Was the finish a botch? Because they didn't. Because they went. I want to see a replay, and they went. No, we're not going to a replay. So I've always thought it was a botch the finish.
Well, it was interesting, wasn't it? Because Santana was trying to bring Michaels back into the ring in like a body slam position, but Michaels held onto the top rope and then he just kind of flat back bumped, and I suppose Michaels' weight full force onto Santana, and the referee counted to 3. So I don't know if that was a planned finish. It was certainly a strange ending to the match. But Nick, what was your thoughts on this one?
Well, first and foremost, I think I've said a lot on sort of Broken But Glorious podcasts. Especially with the new sort of way pay-per-views are going, I think it's so important to get off to a great start as a pay-per-view, to have a match. And I think there's almost, this day and age, there's a lot more pressure on the opening match of a pay-per-view, especially a WrestleMania, than there is for the actual main event itself. But obviously, WrestleMania back in the day, WrestleMania 1, WrestleMania 35, the pressure on the opening match always needs to deliver, and I thought it did just that. Obviously, as you said it yourself, Shawn Michaels sort of getting into his new sort of singles run, but I thought the whole booking was done to a T. Personally, this is again going back and watching it from a first point of view. I would say just very impressed, very happy that the younger wrestler in Shawn Michaels won, and as I say, I think I like the sort of the way it almost added a new dimension to Shawn Michaels' character, the way he won by outsmarting obviously a fellow wrestler there. So no, great opening to the show, and again seeing that different side of Shawn Michaels, and a bit of a bold statement to say this sort of set the tone for the rest of his career, but it certainly didn't obviously go miss as well. So no, a great start to the pay-per-view.
Yeah, absolutely, and like I say, I love the the trademark Shawn Michaels pose after the match with Sherry laying down at Shawn's feet. That was quite an iconic photo opportunity there. And then on commentary, Bobby Heenan described Michaels as the star of the 90s, and he'll be carrying gold, representing WWF, and he couldn't have been more right if he'd tried. So almost but like Bobby Heenan had his crystal ball out that day on the commentary desk, and he really did foresee the future there. But a good opener. Went 10.5 minutes, but more than anything, a really good introduction. Knowing what we know now about Shawn Michaels, a really good introduction to kind of like the first steps of Shawn Michaels as a heel, you could say, really, in one of his big matches, and getting his singles WrestleMania career off to a fantastic start against the veterans. So a really good way to kind of kick off the show. And then we had the Legion of Doom, LOD. They came out to the stage for an interview with Mean Gene, with Paul Ellering as well. Paul Ellering making his WWF debut as their manager, and although he was their long-time manager as part of the Legion of Doom stable in the NWA and through the territory days, this was also LOD's return after a bit of a hiatus following Hawk's suspension from a violation of their drug policy, I understand. However, before the suspension, I think you touched upon this earlier, Chris, it was meant to be LOD, the Legion of Doom, versus Money Incorporated for the tag team titles at Mania. And as we'll talk about a little bit later on, it turned out to be the Natural Disasters versus Money Inc. instead, as you explained earlier. Any thoughts or memories from this promo segment? Of course, you had, Animal and Hawk. They were always good on the microphone. You, of course, had Paul Ellering as well, and he's quite a good promo guy. So quite a unique setting. They had a nice stage set up in the middle of the arena, so you kind of saw the fans around. But any thoughts or memories on what went down during this interview segment here then, guys? Start with you, Nick.
Well, first and foremost, Paul Ellering. Always been a big fan of obviously going back and watching classics with Paul Ellering. But even in this day and age, I think with when obviously it was on NXT with AOP, a fantastic manager. Didn't actually know what you were just saying there. It was very interesting to know that was the case. As well, but I think whenever this one thing, not to go too much into the new era, I think more tag teams do need a sort of a manager like that. I mean, obviously we get the odd superstar that's got a manager like with Brock Lesnar and Paul Heyman, but I think tag teams these days, we've said on Broken But Glorious many times that the tag team division is not as strong as it should be and could be. But I think just doing basics by getting sort of managers in like that, it just goes a long way. But as I say, I think with this promo, it set the tone for the match later on in the night as well. But overall, just just a classic shout to Mean Gene, because there will never be a better backstage interviewer than Mean Gene as well, has to be said.
Good shout, and I totally agree on your point regarding managers as well. They need to bring back more managers, and I think when they do, it definitely works. But Chris, were you a Legion of Doom fan, and did you enjoy this promo segment and Mean Gene?
I was a massive Legion of Doom fan back in the day. I'm a massive fan of shouty promos, so please give me Legion of Doom shouting. So that,
yeah.
Natural assassin. Did you think Paul Ellering was a bit heelish in this? It's like he came across as look at, if I hadn't seen this, I would have thought this was like a heel turn for Legion of Doom, because he was like, "I have returned," blah blah blah. Blah.
Yeah, maybe.
But was it? Yeah, but I'm not. Yeah.
But I don't know if you remember, guys, but shortly after this, and in the build-up to SummerSlam '92, they introduced a ventriloquist dummy called Rocco to well and truly kind of ruin any credibility that the Legion of Doom had. But look, we didn't have. Yeah, we didn't have Rocco here, but yeah. So this was a really fun segment at WrestleMania VIII, though. But any other fond memories, Chris, on what went down here?
Well, go back to the Rocco. Didn't Hawk quit after SummerSlam because he thought that was the most terrible angle of all time, and just stayed in England and joined the biker gang for a bit?
Yeah, I read the same.
Just didn't return to America. But this got me well up for, because again they were meant to go into SummerSlam for the tag team titles, but then did they? No, they were meant to go into that, but they ended up. They dropped the Money Inc. dropped the titles to Natural Disaster a few weeks beforehand. But
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
This just got me excited. I wish they had just these shouty promos like they did back in the day. They need to reintroduce. They have backstage promos where people can just make mistakes, do it again, don't have to do things live.
Speaking of awesome promos, we had Jake Roberts backstage, and he's the master. I mean, even when you watch him now on AEW, I mean, Jake Roberts, he's teaching everybody, before him how to cut a promo, even at his age nowadays. But thinking 28 years ago and back in the 80s and the early 90s, Jake Roberts, there was nobody better on the end of a microphone than Jake Roberts. I mean, he cut a really chilling kind of classic Jake Roberts promo here.
It's quiet, but it's intense.
It's menacing, isn't it?
Opposite to what everything else would be. Because everything else in the 80s was so shouty, and he just was intense, but to the point, and you're like, oh. But
he would stare into the camera, wouldn't he? And you'd kind of, as a kid, I think Jake Roberts could be just as scary as the Undertaker growing up. But he was talking us through the attack on Paul Bearer on the funeral parlor from a few weeks earlier that obviously set up their match. But and then we had the match between Jake the Snake Roberts versus the Undertaker. Now I don't know if you noticed this, possibly Chris, I don't know, but Jake Roberts' music seemed a little bit different when he kind of came out during his match here. I don't know if they kind of edited it for the network. I know there's been a lot of kind of music that's been changed or edited for the WWE network, but and then the Undertaker's entrance WrestleMania VIII. I always remember his entrance here. It was brilliant even back then, and it was in a well-lit arena. Usually we used to seeing the Undertaker come out in a dark arena. There's fireworks, there's lightning bolts, but here it was a fairly light arena, completely different to what we would come to expect from the Undertaker over the next 30 years. But there were some more classic lines from Bobby Heenan during this match, saying, do you know how the Undertaker got the urn the old-fashioned way? He earned it. And 28 years ago, that was a funny line, but that did pop me. And just some, interesting facts about this match. The Undertaker had only been with the company for about a year and a half before WrestleMania VIII by this point, and he'd already been WWF champion. and was already beginning his babyface run. Obviously, before Jake the Snake's feud with the Undertaker had been solely a heel up until just before WrestleMania VIII. So he was kind of fairly fresh into his babyface run here. Jake even nailed the Undertaker with 2 DDTs, but the Undertaker just sat up both times. The Undertaker goes after Jake, who tries to grab the urn from Paul Bearer on the outside. Taker drops Jake with a tombstone on the outside, rolls him back inside the ring, pins him 1, 2, 3. So I thought this was a really fun match. Like I say, 2 really interesting characters, similar sort of dark side characters, you could say. And the Undertaker, little did we know then, but the Undertaker was already well on his way to his legendary WrestleMania streak, 2-0 at this point in 1992, because of course he had that WrestleMania win against Jimmy Snuka in WrestleMania VII. So give us your thoughts on this match then, gents. Starting with you, Chris. Jake Roberts versus the Undertaker. Did you enjoy it? Well, if so, what did you enjoy about it?
I really enjoyed it. It's I loved the old school zombie Undertaker where you're dead slow and walking around, and then it was just really fun going back and watching how into the character he was back in '92. How the way he sat up, the way he walked dead slow, everything was slow, methodical, and I'm just seeing Jake in such great shape, and I think this is his last match for a while. He went to WCW after this match, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. Then it was around this time when he appeared in WCW. Yeah.
But yeah, I really enjoyed this match. I think it could have done with another. I think they could have put another 5 minutes onto this match. And
yeah, it was quite a short match.
I think it was 6 minutes.
6 minutes, yeah, 6 minutes. I think it was right.
I think they could have padded it out a little bit and made it a bit more psychological. But I did really enjoy it for what it was.
Yeah, and it definitely showed Undertaker as very, very dominant, and obviously, he was quite dominant as a heel when they were obviously trying to make him into a dominant.
Nobody kicked out of the DDT in '92, so to get 2 on them and just sit up, it's just just put over the Undertaker as this huge force.
Yeah, but what about yourself, Nick? Did you enjoy this one?
Yeah, no, I think as well, much like the Shawn Michaels, it was booked again very correctly. Obviously, a new dominant character going over a veteran once again. Again, obviously, I personally think from watching from the first time, I think they actually got the time of the match put spot on. I think I think obviously you don't want to bury anyone sort of the start like Joe Roberts, and having a new heel coming and dominating the matter of sort of minutes or seconds even. So I think 6 minutes is a good enough time. And no, as I say, I think obviously Jake did get a few moves in, but overall Undertaker was always in that control. You always felt like Undertaker was always in control. And then also the tombstone. I mean, it got a massive pop from the crowd, didn't it, when the tombstone was hit? So, and again, if I was sort of to watch it back in this live, so to speak, back in 1992, I think straight away you would have gone, this guy's a star. Whether you would have predicted to go for another 21 matches unbeaten, it's not. 19 even, sorry, to be precise. I don't think it'd be interesting what odds you would have got back on there if you were to make a bet on that. But no, very, very good, solid match. But more importantly, the booking was absolutely spot on, in my opinion.
The camera work was really good in this match as well, because they kept cutting to the crowd, and the kids were all terrified of the Undertaker, even though he was meant to be the face.
Things you'd love to see, to be fair. That would be cruel against kids watching wrestling, but it's a bit like what we said last year when sort of The Fiend debuted. Rest in peace, The Fiend, I must say. But when he first started, when The Fiend sort of came out for the first time, there was, or even Bray Wyatt, when Bray Wyatt came out in that Raw in 2013, when you hear the general screams from the kids in the audience, it really helps the character so much. And
yeah, my 4-year-old's terrified of The Fiend.
Yeah, that's what you want. In a way, obviously, we want to go to bed at night still. But
yeah, he got a poster in his WWE magazine, and we always threaten him we'll put it up in his room if he's not.
If he doesn't behave, doesn't wash his hands before dinner and what have you.
That's an interesting parenting technique, but there we go. But it's interesting, isn't it?
We're not coming on the show to terrify their kids.
But when you draw the kind of similarities and the dynamics between the Fiend and the Undertaker, the similarities are definitely there, aren't they? The similarities are definitely there in terms of the music, the menacing music, the menacing entrance, and kind of the character that's impervious to pain. And absolutely loved that. And but then we had one of the matches of the night, then, gents. I mean, first of all, we had a backstage promo segment between Roddy Piper and Bret the Hitman Hart, and that was really fun.
I found this funny because I still find it funny, but I've got nostalgia for it. Do you find it funny, Nick?
I will be honest, I flipped from match to match. I didn't actually see the interview. I must throw my hands up and be a bit honest there. But again, you don't need to tell it. But Roddy Piper, one of my favourite promo, one of my favourite guys that could cut a promo. Even so whilst I haven't seen this one, whether he was a heel, whether he was a face, one of the best, if not one of the best to cut promos. Absolutely incredible. We talk about Jake the Snake giving chills. This sort of almost gives you the opposite, where it sort of just motivates you. And if you watch Roddy Piper cut a promo and you don't think, yeah, I'd love to be a wrestler.
I think you'd really like this promo because it starts off that he's trying to be friendly and buddy with Bret Hart, but then he starts taking the piss out of him a little bit, and then Bret just shuts him down. I want your bells. And
it gets serious pretty quick, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I would recommend you go watch it.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry for interrupting. So it's okay.
No, but like I say, it was an excellent promo segment, and what I was going to say about this, it reminds me certainly of going back to promo segments like this in the 90s that were unscripted and so much better than anything you get that's quite repetitive and robotic nowadays. But it was, like saying, it set the scene perfectly for the match, because going into it was kind of set out as a babyface versus babyface match, but pretty soon as you go into the match, and I think the promo kind of set the scene, you definitely had Roddy Piper showing more heel tendencies, but going into the match, and it was for the Intercontinental Championship as well. Gorilla Monsoon on commentary brought up that this was the Intercontinental title was the only championship that Roddy Piper had won in the WWF to this point. To the best of my knowledge, Piper went on many years later to win the tag team titles alongside Ric Flair, but you're talking a good 20 years later. But that
was 2006 or 7.
Yeah, so a good 14 years later then.
Spirit Squad, whenever they were about, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, Roddy Piper, I know that we've had this conversation and debate on many podcasts, but Roddy Piper was never a world champion, despite being on top wherever he went, whatever company he wrestled in. Knowing how good Roddy Piper was as a character and on the microphone, he wasn't the most technically gifted wrestler, but when he was in there, it definitely, everything he did meant something, and everything he did was done with a purpose. And we saw in this match here against Bret Hart that he could turn it on whether he was a face, he could turn it on whether he was a heel. But do you think that there's a missed opportunity on not having Roddy Piper as a world champion in one company or another somewhere, in the 80s or the 90s? What do you say, gents?
100%. I think he's an absolute legend. I mean, we could be here for a sort of a while talking about wrestlers who should have been WWE champion or should have been WCW champion, etc. But Piper, I mean, if anyone's ever to do a top 5, if Piper's not in there number 1, number 2, then they need their head testing, because he's absolute brilliant. And so this has come from someone obviously didn't grow up with Roddy Piper, but someone who goes back and watches all these classics. You've hit the nail on the head there. Saying he can do a job as a face, he can do a job as a heel. If someone can do both roles to absolute perfection, then they're made to be the top guy in the division. Because it's so difficult to obviously pull off the master of being a both fantastic heel and a fantastic face. But he was great on the mic, excellent in the ring. How he wasn't champion is just quite beyond me.
Yeah, Chris, what are your thoughts on Roddy Piper? Go on.
Well, it was kind of just the perfect foil to Hulk Hogan, so it is weird that. So I don't think Hulk Hogan ever pinned him, did he? I think it was always disqualification or count out whenever they had a match. So it was weird that he never won the title from Hogan. And it would have been interesting having a storyline where it was Hulk Hogan chasing Roddy Piper and Piper just always getting away with the title. I thought that could have been a fun Maybe going into WrestleMania 1 if they had that as the main event.
Yeah, that would have been good.
That would have been better.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
We did. Cause me and Nick actually met on a forum, and on that, I remember on that one of the first polls they did on that forum was who's the greatest wrestler ever to win the WWF titles.
Oh, I remember that.
And
Yeah,
we tweeted him, and he tweeted us back saying thank you for voting me the best wrestler never to win a WWE title. It's like 2011, 2012.
That's pretty cool. That's really cool. But I mean, this match in particular, it really gets going when Bret Hart throws Piper to the outside.
How short it was as well.
Yeah,
so, in my head, it's like a 25-minute epic match. It's only like 12 minutes.
13 minutes.
13, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, when Piper come back into the ring, he spat in Bret Hart's face, so that kind of really got the crowd heat and really kind of set out Piper's tendencies to be the heel in the match. Something you didn't see too often in the WWF, and we spoke about this off air, was the amount of blood at WrestleMania VIII, and this was the first match to see a bit of colour when Bret got busted open from a punch, or it appeared to be a punch in the face from Roddy Piper. This, in my opinion, it definitely added to the match, definitely.
Yeah, Bret admitted since he bladed, even though at the time they told him it was the hard way.
Exactly.
Because he would have got fined if he was admitted to it at the time.
Yeah.
But then after the next couple of minutes, Piper just punching him in the eye to make it bleed and bleed and bleed. It's like, brilliant. Just that couple of minutes. So.
Yeah, I mean, the storytelling in this match as well was off the charts, to be honest with you. But the match came to an end when Bret reversed like a chokehold or a sleeper hold from Roddy by climbing the turnbuckles, pushing backwards off the turnbuckles, and then using all of his weight to pin Roddy Piper to the mat to become the new and I think 2-time Intercontinental Champion. After the match, we saw Piper do the right thing by handing over the belt to Hart, and the two of them finished by hugging in the ring. So that kind of brought Roddy Piper back into the babyface picture, you could say. Like you say, the match went just under 13 minutes 51 seconds. I also loved the turmoil that went through the mind of Roddy Piper when he had the ring bell and was kind of wrestling with his own kind of thoughts as to whether to hit Bret Hart or not to hit Bret Hart with the ring bell. And like I said, the storytelling in this match was insane. But starting with you, Chris, give us your thoughts on this one. Like I say, that there's two great matches at WrestleMania VIII, and this was definitely the first of those two. So a bit of a classic. Tell us your thoughts on this one.
Yes, I do think this is my favourite match on the night, even though Macho Man's my favourite wrestler, and him winning later is like a great moment for my childhood. But yeah, from the beginning, that promo set the scene.
Yeah,
Bret wanted the title. And then it was just a brawl. Then he got busted open. Then Piper was just punching him in the face, blood everywhere. And then there was the ref bump. And Piper went out and got the bell. And it was like, oh, do I hit him with the bell? And Heenan's brilliant at this bit. Just hit him. But he thought, no, I'll do it properly. I'll finish it with my finisher. Puts him in his sleep hold, which ends up being his foil. And Bret gets the win. But do you get brilliant match. So,
Nick, a bit of a question for you, Nick. I know that this was your first time in seeing WrestleMania VIII, and like I say, the wrestling in general has changed a lot over the last 30 years. But this was a match that kind of, it's a classic wrestling match that probably would have, been just as much at home in 2020 as it was in 1992. So give us your thoughts on this one and kind of, like I say, the storytelling was there as well, wasn't it? It wasn't just about the action, it was the storytelling as well, my friend.
Oh, of course it was, absolutely. But also, again, what Chris said, obviously, it did feel a lot longer than 40 minutes. But the thing that makes it even weirder is I actually felt it had a bit of a slow start to the match as well. But then it seems to pick up. I don't know what minute it was, but it just picked up rapidly, the match. It was a very kind of weird sort of start where it was a bit slow, whether obviously after the apparent backstage promo there, or for setting the tone for it. Maybe that's what it made, arguably, that's what made it a bit weird with the sort of slow starts. But the whole match was just great from start to finish. Again, Bret proving that he really is sort of the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be.
Yeah.
I just feel, as I say, when you sort of have all the, just I think that when I was saying with wrestling, you need to get the little things right in there. I've said it on, Christian's probably bored of me saying about that. Like every pay-per-view, I always say you need the little things just go so far. And it was seeing like Piper with like obviously thinking about cheating and changing his mind because he respects Bret. Just those little things just really get you involved into a wrestling match, the emotion and everything of obviously of the watching on to the match. So I think they got all the little things just to a T, and no, absolutely excellent. And as I say, I really like the I just really like the post match of Piper putting the title on Bret's shoulder. Big fan of that. So it sort of reminds me, if you're going to compare it to this day, it kind of reminds you a bit almost of a sort of a Johnny Gargano sort of match, with it be it Adam Cole, be it Tommaso.
Yeah.
It kind of has that. If we're going to start comparing from sort of back in 2020 back to 1992, but no, fantastic wrestling match. You need to underline the word wrestling there, but they did also get, as I say, the little snippets down to a T.
And both these guys have basically been heels the whole WWE career until recently, so you can still see they've both got heel tendencies in the storytelling as well, which is brilliant. And that's where their brain was brilliant as well, because he couldn't decide who to support, so he was just supporting whoever was doing the most heelish thing at the time. So it's just like,
Well, I think even if you go on to any sort of debate about, they all say what was Piper's best ever match. This one just always comes up, doesn't it? On any debates, I think if you ever get involved to talk about Roddy Piper, obviously I know there's a lot of debates when tragically he did pass away a few years ago. There was obviously naturally when a superstar does pass, then naturally obviously all the debates do come up of, I wonder what, when you talk in a positive way of best ever matches, this one was just one that was on top of everyone's list that you must, obviously your networks must watch. So I'm so happy I've finally got around to watching it, and loved every second, but more importantly loved the little snippets. But just a great wrestling match, great story telling, and they got, as I say, pretty much everything they could have got right, did get right with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we had a kind of a backstage thing live via kind of satellite. You had the total package, Lex Luger. Now he wasn't due to be debuting in WWF, but he was due to be debuting in the WBF, the World Bodybuilding Federation. Now this was another kind of offshoot, another thing that Vince McMahon was trying to get off the ground. Bodybuilding was pretty big back in the early 90s, but
even back then it was pretty niche.
Yeah, well, yeah, but they were trying to make it more mainstream, weren't they? I mean, they did have kind of a regular TV show. I think they even did their own WBF pay-per-views as well. But and I think Lex Luger was, well, I mean, Lex Luger was even going to be part of the WBF, but I don't think that actually happened in the end. In fact, the next time I remember seeing Lex Luger was when he was unveiled as the narcissist Lex Luger at the Royal Rumble in 1993.
He had a motorcycle accident, meaning he couldn't compete at the WWF, so by the time it came back round, the WWF had folded, but he still had a contract with like WWE, so that's why he started wrestling. So he went into it not wanting to wrestle, he wanted to just do the bodybuilding side of it.
Yeah, but so that didn't materialise, like you say. He had the motorcycle accident, then we saw him back as the narcissist. But then we get a fun little match. I say little, it had a lot of people involved. It had the Mountie, the Nasty Boys, and the Repo Man versus Virgil, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Big Boss Man, and Sergeant Slaughter. So, they won't be getting any 5-star ratings from Dave Meltzer any day of the week. But
I'm glad they grouped them all together and they didn't have them all in separate.
Exactly. This was their version of the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal, just to get as many people into one match to get a WrestleMania payday as possible. But I did chuckle with the ring introductions from the host of Family Feud's Ray Coombs. I loved how he mocked the Mountie, and then he mocked the Repo Man, and then as he was mocking the Nasty Boys chased him out of the ring. I thought that was quite fun. I think, like I say, this match was designed to get as many people into a WrestleMania match as possible. The match only went about 6.5 minutes with Virgil, of all people, getting the pinfall after Nasty Boy sags. He clobbered his own partner, Knobs, allowing Virgil to make the cover and get the pinfall. So thoughts on this one? I thought the ring introductions were quite fun. It was probably the most entertaining part of the whole match, but it's more of a kind of a step down memory lane for all the different characters that were involved. And I was quite a big Repo Man fan back in the day. But Nick, starting with yourself, let's say, having clapped eyes on WrestleMania 8 for the first time this week, this must have been quite an interesting little match for you.
Yeah, I mean, from someone who's been to WrestleMania live, there's my
This is
reference, Chris. Yeah,
this is one for sure.
but you always look for. Oh, I wonder what matches would be great to time for a toilet break, sort of thing.
Yep.
I don't want to diss it too much, but no, I didn't enjoy it. I thought it was very. I thought, yeah, it's nice obviously when you get your celeb, because you forget WrestleMania is all about getting your stars from all over to come in, because you're going to obviously attract in a wide audience. So great they managed to get that, and yeah, the entrances were pretty funny, but that was about as good as it got. I thought the match was just boring, didn't do anything for me at all. I suppose it was the only good thing, I suppose, the baby faces won, so at least it keeps the crowd happy. I mean, when I looked at it, when I was sort of going, oh yeah, I was like, yeah, it'd be quite good if Slaughter wins or Bossman wins or Jim Duggan wins, and then I was like, oh, hang on, Virgil's won. What's going on here?
I've heard the original plan was they were going to put Jim Duggan and Sergeant Slaughter in the tag team title match. And then or they're going to have them against Money Inc. and then have the LOD and Natural Disasters for the title. But I'm not. I think that's what they said on the OSW review. That was that's what they thought the plan was going in. But
could have been.
A bigger fall from grace for like Sergeant Slaughter headlining, being a champion at WrestleMania, to going into a comedy multi-man match the next WrestleMania.
Do you know, I'd love to see a trend of all wrestlers who have gone from wrestling in in recent years, you can probably already get the trend going. Nakamura, WrestleMania 34 to WrestleMania 35, I think he's in a tag team title match, and it obviously got lost pretty quickly. I'm pretty sure 33, or even there is a trend that goes on, sort of thing, like wrestlers who made him into Daniel Bryan, WrestleMania 30, then was in, albeit a very good ladder match for the Intercontinental title. There always seems to be a trend going where someone's obviously in a great match at WrestleMania, and the next year they've sort of been a not very good one, or just a sort of a skip through match, so to speak.
Yeah, I can see where you're getting at there, because like I say, some people are just hot for a year, or hot because of their gimmick, and then not so much afterwards. But I think if you're flavour of the month with Vince McMahon, then you'll get a good push one year, but not the next. But there we go.
Yeah.
But let's talk about something more interesting. And I mentioned earlier that WrestleMania VIII was pretty much all about two matches, you could say. And this was the second match that a lot of people were looking forward to. It was billed as kind of one half of the double main event for WrestleMania VIII. It was, of course, Ric Flair versus the Macho Man Randy Savage for the WWF World Title. Before that, you had a classic backstage promo with Ric Flair and Mr. Perfect. Another fantastic Flair promo, as you would expect. And I always thought the combination of Ric Flair and Mr. Perfect during this time was dare I say it, the perfect wrestling combination, but pun intended. But going into the match, Ric Flair's entrance, with the kind of 2001 Space Odyssey music playing in the background, and the 67,000 people. It was a really special entrance, and of course he left WCW in late 1991 on a real low after having a bad time there that year, and then here he is in April 1992. The WWF brought back the old Ric Flair. Really, he was the WWF World Champion, and the electricity from the fans through this match, it told it all. To be honest with you, the fans were on the edge of their seats. This, when you think about it, this match was kind of more of a 2-on-1 match. To be honest with you, you had Savage having to fend off both Flair and Mr. Perfect pretty much throughout the whole match. But the booking of this match, we've spoken about the booking in some of the matches so far. The booking of this match was absolutely fantastic. We saw a bit of blood earlier on in the show with Bret Hart and Roddy Piper, of course. We saw more blood here. Ric Flair got busted open after getting a double axe handle from Savage, causing Flair to go headfirst into the guard railing / a razor blade. But the fans were really into everything that happened in this match, and it was probably Ric Flair's best singles match in his first run with the company, in my opinion. And then you had Elizabeth. She came down to support her husband, flanked by WWF officials.
She came down a bit early.
But maybe, but I mean, it kind of worked. It certainly.
I think it would have worked better if she came out whilst he was in the figure four.
Yeah, I didn't really tweak, to be honest with you. It seemed okay to me, but you do make an interesting point, definitely. But and of course, Flair was bleeding like a stuffed pig. He was targeting Randy Savage's injured knee throughout the match, and of course there was that figure four, and the drama in this match was at fever pitch. And after Savage blocked a punch from Flair, he rolled Flair up with a handful of tights, showing Ric Flair's bare cheeks to the world for the 1, 2, 3. So then after the match, everything breaks down with Flair stealing a kiss from Liz. Savage goes berserk. Flair and Perfect laying the kicks while the officials were holding Randy Savage down. I couldn't understand what was going on there. But Savage was the one celebrating when all said and done as the two-time WWF champion. And in the end, he's standing side by side with Liz. The match went 18 minutes. And like I say, another terrific match. And I was a massive Ric Flair fan at the time. Was gutted that he lost. But a hell of a time to be a wrestling fan back in 1992. Now, Nick, let's start with you. I mean, we spoke earlier about Bret Hart, Roddy Piper being a match that would fit quite nicely in with the modern era. This match, again, storytelling, a little bit of blood, some great action, some great booking. Give us your thoughts on what went down here. There was lots going on, lots to unpick. But how did you interpret this match?
Well, I absolutely loved it from start to finish. Just fantastic. Again, just to kind of reiterate what you're saying there was so much going on in the match that you love it, and it was great. There was a lot going on, but it wasn't over the top like you sometimes see in matches where there's so much shenanigans. You're like, oh, for God's sake, what, you're wrecking a perfectly good match, and some of this not really needed. They got, again, everything they got to this was done to an absolute T. I loved every second. I think 18 minutes as well, perfect amount of time. You worry if it went on for like, even sometimes you get WrestleMania matches, they go on for like almost half an hour sort of thing, and I think 18 minutes was absolutely perfect for this. And then you only got to look at the reaction when Savage won was just incredible. We talk about, I sometimes compare sort of when superstars win to almost football atmosphere when teams score. I think if that ever happens, like the one that always springs to mind is sort of CM Punk when he won the title at Money in the Bank in his hometown. This was just incredible, and the atmosphere when Savage won, it was just general emotion from people losing their minds, cheering, which is just what you want to see. But for the match itself, just so the emotion displayed by both men was just incredible. So some of it brutal at times as well. Was sort of, as you mentioned, blood. You're from taking what you guys are saying. There wasn't an awful lot of blood back in 1992, or even now.
There was a no blood policy in '92.
Oh, was there? Oh, okay. So pretty much similar to now.
They both got heavily fined for this match apparently. Because it was so blatant that he bladed. So.
Yeah, so I think obviously when you see blood now, naturally like, oh dear, something's gone wrong sort of thing. But when if they're using it to add to the match, it really does help, because even when it's accidental, you're like, yeah, this guy looks like a badass. This is really added to like a little bit. Even if it's just if it's like a jobber's getting beaten up and they start bleeding, it still adds a lot. So no, to add it to this match was fantastic. It was brutal, and but I think that again they got everything down to a T with Randy Savage, more importantly, winning the match, him holding high, and just to see a Flair, even when it went into sort of, I know we'll get into it in a second, where he went backstage after, Flair just so pissed off about losing. It was just absolutely, it just adds so much, and you almost get into sort of the, he's legitimate angry there, and it just goes such a long way. But and again, we're going back to what we said at the start of the show, commentary for this on another level, superb, really helps. And again, putting both men over, but it absolutely adds to a fantastic moment. I know me and Chris are going to be putting together this best card. I think it'll be difficult to find a better WWE, WWF World Title main event, because this was just incredible.
Yeah, this was going to be my nomination for that show.
Two of the best of all time. Absolute gems in the ring. So I'm so gutted that I didn't get to obviously experience more. Well, I will now, although obviously we're in unpresent. Obviously, when we've got loads of time on our hands, there'll be a lot to go back and watch Randy Savage matches, because I absolutely love this.
Yeah, Chris?
Yeah, as I said, Macho Man was my favourite wrestler growing up. He was the whole point of me. I think he's the reason I like wrestling. So, the storyline going into this was brilliant, because Ric Flair was saying that he was with Liz before Savage got with her, and he had all these doctored photos, and he was gonna, when he won, he had this centerfold he was gonna release to everyone to see, which we never got to see. But yeah, and from the beginning it was just Macho Man was so angry, just battering him, and then he got the leg injury, which he sold like a boss the whole match.
Yeah.
And then for him to win with a pulling a handful of tights, and I'm so surprised they haven't pixelated that on the network. But yeah, I was so happy. I was quite disappointed with his reign after that because it didn't last very long. He lost it back to Ric Flair very long after this. But it was such a great moment from my childhood. I still love it. And, yeah.
I've got a question for you both. I mean, did you think Vince McMahon looked? I mean, this could be a question I should ask at the very end of the podcast, really. But do you think he looks back on this WrestleMania with fondness, or despite the fact he was probably, spitting feathers or really, really angry backstage at the amount of blood in those two matches in particular? But do you think he kind of looks back at this WrestleMania as a classic and looks back on it with fondness, or do you think he's always kind of a little bit of a sore subject when it comes to this with Vince McMahon? How do you think he kind of looks back on this one?
Well, there's so many WrestleManias he could go back on and go, oh, well, I could have done that completely better. I mean, already at the top of my head, I've already got 5 WrestleManias flying through my head of, well, that was rubbish, that was rubbish. They should have ended the show much better than that, or they completely cocked that up, sort of thing. But from this one, I mean, I loved I loved this WrestleMania from just watching it last night. So, I personally wouldn't. I mean, again, Vince obviously will have a complete different. Well, he's clearly got a different mindset to a lot of people of how to
True.
how his booking goes. But for me, there's not an awful lot I would have changed throughout this, and especially to the show so far.
Yeah.
I think he will going forward. He thought he did a really good job. If you look at the first 3 matches, he's got these old '80s guys putting over the future. You got Tito, Jake, and Roddy Piper, all '80s legends, putting over the new gen legends.
Yeah.
And it's great, because it was only Macho Man's second reign, so it was a great moment. It's what the fans had wanted for ages because he retired the year before.
Yeah, absolutely.
He wanted to have kids with Liz, and he wanted to get off the roids and just get off the road and start having children. And he got asked to come back just for this last run. So to have him back, but
yeah, definitely.
I think going forward, I think he must have thought this is a success. I don't know how financial success it was, but it's great storylines going into most of these matches. So.
Yeah, most definitely.
Coming out of them, so.
And then we had another match. We had Tatanka versus the model Rick Martel.
I couldn't tell you anything about this match.
No, I mean, Tatanka picked up the win after 4.5 minutes, but a bit of an uneventful match. I mean, my only thoughts here was that it was kind of Tatanka's first WrestleMania match. He was fairly new on the scene. Another, like you say, 80s legend putting over a fairly new blood wrestler, and that definitely. Yeah, absolutely. So that worked. But and then we had a match for the tag team titles. It was Money Incorporated versus the Natural Disasters. This match, once again, quite forgettable, and it ended in a count out with DiBiase, IRS. Jimmy Hart kind of leaving the ring, leaving the match essentially. And who would have thought a WrestleMania match would have ended in a count out, especially with a title on the line? But this was against obviously Earthquake and Typhoon. Any thoughts on this one, gentlemen? And you had some very, very good, capable wrestlers in terms of IRS and Ted DiBiase. I did quite like the Natural Disasters when I was 16 years old. I thought, they worked quite well as a team. 2 big, strong, menacing individuals. But any thoughts on this tag title match, and especially the way it ended as well in a bit of a count out? I think if you were live in the arena watching this in 1992, you'd have been pretty disappointed with a count out finish.
I reckon on the night you'll be really disappointed with this, but looking back at it, that's what they did. They walked out on their title matches, and then eventually they got told. Was it WrestleMania? Yeah, I don't know if the WrestleMania 9. They got told you have to get back to the ring or you lose the titles. So they based the whole title reign around. They just walked out on their matches.
That's part of their gimmick, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
It would have been disappointed at the time. I think they were recently became baby faces, natural disasters. So it would have been a good storyline for them to win the titles.
Yeah. Any thoughts on this one, Nick?
Well, I've been very positive so far, but I'm going to be really brutal. Absolutely hated both these matches, especially for the Hunker match. I was like, right, okay, well, I'm struggling to find out anything to say about this. So I'm going to look online.
I couldn't think of anything for it. I can't tell you one thing that happened in the tank match.
First thing I was trying to look up sites, and I think I was trying to look up. I was like, okay, well, there might be some good reviews about it. Maybe someone who's ridiculously positive will have something good to say. First thing I see was boring match with no heat. Crowd didn't care. Neither did I. We'll never watch again. So that's exactly how I feel. But and then for the tag match again, worst match of the night. If I'm going to be honest, really, really painful to watch. Even at times, just didn't do anything for me at all.
A great work, and Tugboat isn't great, but they're both capable.
Well, it upsets me because you know how much I love my tag team.
All four of them are capable wrestlers.
Yeah.
And they had a matching costumes, which you like as well.
All I want is a tag team I love. Why is it so difficult to book tag team matches? Even we're going back to 1992, and they still can't do it. Then what's the clock on? Why is it difficult to book a tag team match? You should be. It's just it really. I could be over here ranting for a while now, but book tag team wrestling. I love it.
And then of course Typhoon, otherwise known as Tugboat, he shortly, soon after this, went off to WCW and became the Shockmaster, and we all know that he's now a legendary internet meme from what happened that night. But the second to last match, and I almost forgot this match actually happened, but it was the Rocket Owen Hart versus Skinner. Now it only went a minute and a half. Now I don't know what happened. I completely forgot. But when I was watching this match, I was going into it thinking that Skinner won, but then I was pleasantly reminded that Owen Hart picked up the victory, and Skinner was a fairly new character on the scene, so you would think, being a new character, they're the one that they're trying to get over and push. But no, the Rocket Owen Hart picked up the victory on Skinner after just a minute and a half. So
he got battered for a minute and a half, and then did a roll up. It wasn't even like he tried.
No, exactly. But it was just nice to see Owen Hart have a WrestleMania a match and a win. But any thoughts on this match, gentlemen? Obviously, Skinner, he spat the tobacco in Owen Hart's face, and like I say, did have the majority of the offense for for as long as the match went, and then just a roll up victory for Owen Hart, and then that's match done basically. But any thoughts on this one?
I would have preferred if they put a 5 minute Bulldog Berserker match. Would have been better here.
Yeah, I agree.
I would.
I think it's way it could have been a bit better because Skinner's a good wrestler, and so is Owen. So it was a bit of a waste having a 90-second match, but. Yeah,
and it wasn't as if they were short on time. I mean, the show in total only went just over 2.5 hours, and the longest match was 18 minutes. So I can't understand why they didn't give them a few minutes longer, or give them a 5-minute match and let them really show what they could do. But
was Owen in high energy at this point, or was he still part of the new foundation? Because they could have fit another quick tag team match in here. I can't remember.
I can't remember. Possibly high energy, because I know that did the new foundation have a match at the Rumble that year, but then soon after Owen was tagging with Coco Beware. So this must have been the transition between the two tag teams. But good victory for Owen Hart, and like I said, I'd actually forgotten that he did win this match. I thought it was the other way around going into it, but was pleasantly reminded the other way around. But then let's talk about our main event then, gents. So this was interesting for many, many reasons. No title on the line. It was Hulk Hogan versus Sid Justice, the second half to the double main event for WrestleMania VIII. And now, looking back, I wish it had been Randy Savage versus Ric Flair in the main event spot at the very end match. Obviously, it had the drama, had the title change. Yeah, I totally agree. But, Vince McMahon's mindset, certainly in the 90s, was all about the big guys. You obviously had Hulk Hogan, 6'7", 300 pounds, Sid 6'9", 310 pounds. And I'm sure it was, Vince's wet dream to have two big muscular guys in the main event of WrestleMania. But I love the fact that the fight started. I don't think the match had officially started, but the fight started between these two while Hogan's music was still playing. I think the music was playing for a good few minutes while the individuals were kind of fighting kind of around the ring, and the fans were whipped into a frenzy as Hogan ripped off his shirt after nailing Sid with a few punches to the head. Now, despite the huge pop for Hogan, this was about the time where the fans were starting to turn against Hogan. It certainly was apparent in the 92 Royal Rumble, where there was a lot of boos for Hogan. With big Sid, he was just as popular with the males, kind of the 18 to 40 age bracket around this time. I was quite pleased to see Sid. I was a fan of his in WCW, but pleased to see him in WWF, and he's a great promo. But I thought he's an excellent heel as well. But any thoughts on these two individuals before we talk about the match itself? But any kind of thoughts about these two individuals and it main event in WrestleMania?
I thought it was actually a pretty poor match. I think to be fair to Hogan and Sid, it was quite difficult given that how fantastic, we've already mentioned two of the matches were, and we're talking absolutely fantastic. So to follow them was always going to be difficult. So I will give them that. That being said, for a main event, you just still expect it to be great, don't you? And it just wasn't that, I'm afraid. I thought Sid's offense wasn't great throughout. Again, I thought some of the stuff could have been just a little lot better, like sort of the whole cup sequence, just not great. I don't think Hogan took almost like near enough punishment as well. And just overall, I thought it just wasn't a great watch, to be honest.
No, I mean, I must say, I quite like the fact that Sid had quite a bit of the offense, and I was quite a big fan of his power moves. Certainly when he did the choke slam with the power bomb, I thought they were quite effective. And I think you didn't see much in the way of choke slams and power bombs back then. That was fairly kind of quite a new move, really. And I think this kind of new age of big men coming onto the scene, doing that sort of thing back in the early 90s.
It's kind of a bit strange in the build-up. They had him against a lot of, like, in a lot of jobber matches where you can batter them, but when you get into the main events where you can't do all these moves to this 300-pound man, it kind of defeats the object of having these jobber matches. So if like Hogan's, I'll let him power bomb him and choke slam him if he's got this movie coming on. So
absolutely.
Maybe in the build-up they could have had, maybe not in as many jobber matches, but make him have convincing victories against upper mid-card faces rather than have him just battering jobbers. Would have made.
But in this one, Sid did powerbomb Hulk Hogan, and Hogan kicked out, and Hogan then came back with two big boots and the leg drop of doom, which Sid kicked out of. Now, there's a couple of major kind of talking points coming out of this match in particular. The first surrounding the kick out. Now, at the end of the match came after the kick out when Harvey Whippleman came into the ring. Hogan picked up Whippleman and then threw him into the arms of Justice. The referee then called for the bell, and then we saw Papa Shango come down the aisle in a rather confused state to attack Hogan. The referee announced the match was a disqualification win to Hogan because Whippleman came into the ring and did absolutely nothing to get disqualified, and it was Hogan that picked him up. And then in a rather bizarre conclusion, you had the Ultimate Warrior come out. And he's come back to the WWF that night to clothesline Papa Shango over the top rope to help chase away Justice and Whippleman, with the show going off the air with Hogan and Warrior posing to the fans. So we've got a listener question that will hopefully kind of allow us to kind of answer what went on there, because Ashley Clement from our Facebook group, he asks, who was at fault for the botched ending of the main event and which match should have been the main event? So I think we already discussed that the WWF title should really have gone on last, but who was at fault for the botched ending? So obviously...
Whoever was in charge of telling Papa Shango when to go out?
Well, this is it. Now, because my understanding was that Papa Shango should have been there to interfere with the pinfall attempt following the powerbomb. And that the leg drop, I think. So I think Shango should have come out and interfered with the pinfall from the leg drop.
Didn't want Sid to kick out the leg drop, so Shango's got to come and break that pin up.
So they had to kind of act quickly there, and Sid was told to kick out, although he wasn't meant to. Had Papa Shango been there on time. So, kind of looking back on this, kind of 28 years later, Chris, it's kind of a bit of a cringy moment, isn't it? Really, we kind of want to watch behind your fingers. But we've heard on podcasts and various things about how this was meant to have gone down. But I mean, are you basically saying that Shango was given the call too late, or that Shango was probably taking an impromptu toilet break? What actually happened here in your opinion?
I'm assuming he was standing at the curtain waiting for his to be told to go out now. That's all I can think of. But he wasn't told, or he wasn't at the spot when he was meant to be. But they could have had Whippleman actually break up the pin, and then it would have been a disqualification.
Yeah.
But just getting into the ring isn't a disqualification unless you actually do something.
Yeah, very bizarre.
Or could have just.
You're supposed to just get removed and go back to the room, to the locker room.
Yeah, I can only put it down to whoever was in Gorilla, who was in charge of making sure Papa Shango was at the curtain, and tell him to bomb it to the ring rather than just slowly wander to the ring like he was.
Yeah. So Nick, this was your first time watching WrestleMania. You must have heard about all the controversy surrounding WrestleMania VIII main events and what happened here with Hogan, Warrior, Shango, Whippleman, Sid. So when you were watching it for the first time this week, could you quite believe what was going on and kind of what was going through your mind as it was happening?
Well, as you say, I've heard a lot about the WrestleMania VIII and who was at fault and who wasn't at fault. But yeah, watching it then, I think even you sort of mentioned there, even watching it for the first time, you're like, oh god, this is quite cringeworthy to watch, whole thing. Especially with all the people that were there and everything. You just sort of, it makes you just laugh, and then it makes you almost, I suppose back in the day they didn't have obviously all of the social media and what have you. Imagine if it happened sort of now, it would just be almost it would be a gif and a meme for life, really, wouldn't it? It probably still is now, but at this day and age, there'll be no escaping it. But after doing thorough research on it, even after this, it does scream like it was Papa Shango's.
They could have had Papa Shango under the ring. It could have been better because the length of that entrance way.
That's probably what they do now. It's probably why everyone's always under the ring now when they need to come out, sort of thing.
Or come through the crowd, because the length of that walkway, everybody would have seen him like 10 minutes before he would have got to the ring anyway. So it would have been a surprise.
It would always make sense to me as well that it's always best to even come out slightly earlier rather than too late. So even if you just time them to come out 30 seconds earlier, at least then you're covering all sort of bases, really. Like if you have to skip off like a minute, like 10 seconds of a match, it doesn't really matter. Or like you just delay your sort of run down to the ring, etc. But yeah, strange, but yeah, as you say, even to you guys watching it 20 years on, but even for myself watching it
they could have had Papa Shango just as one of them Indians in the Tatanka match, and he could have just quickly went up to the ring, and then he would have been there. He would have had a little monitor on to watch it, and then you just get out at the right time.
And then, of course, you had the return of the Ultimate Warrior. Now, even back in 1992, there was so many rumours and speculation that it wasn't the real Ultimate Warrior.
It was Kerry Von Erich.
He didn't look half as big, half as muscular as he did the previous year at WrestleMania VII or WrestleMania VI. Different hair. He just looked like a different person, and he looked a lot smaller. So even when I saw WrestleMania VIII 1992, it didn't look like the same Ultimate Warrior we're all familiar with. But quite
the steroids, didn't he? And
well, exactly.
Had a bit of a haircut.
Yeah, but it made the main event of WrestleMania VIII even kind of more memorable, possibly for all the wrong reasons. But we're still talking about what happens during that main event match.
As a
28 years later,
I loved the Ultimate Warrior returning. I thought it was going to be amazing.
But it was definitely unique, definitely unique. But at the beginning of the show, at the beginning of the podcast, gents, I asked you both, what were your feelings, when you were watching WrestleMania 8 back this week. But having seen it back and discussed it here on the podcast, what were your takeaway, overriding memories or the highlights of WrestleMania 8, having watched it back this week? So starting with you, Chris, what's your kind of takeaway moments of your overriding memories? Having seen it back 28 years after the event itself.
That's it. I think it was a very good event for putting over the next generations, as I said, putting over Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, Tatanka, or get the 80s guys did a great job putting the next generation superstars over. Macho Man, my favorite wrestler of all time, winning the world title was brilliant and a great match. And then Piper versus Bret, still an all-time classic. And I still love it, even though it has that terrible. It is a show of two halves. If you just had the first match up to the world title match, or even if with that 8-man tag in the middle, does its job. But it is a bit poor after the world title match.
Yeah.
But I still love it. I still watch it at least once or twice a year. Just for nostalgia pop.
Yeah, same here. Nick, what about yourself? Having seen it for the first time this week, what's kind of your takeaway memories and your overall final thoughts about WrestleMania 8?
Yeah, well, one is a generic thought for just wrestling as a whole of how great are returns when they're not sort of announced all over when they're not pre-announced for starters, but when they're not like heavily rumoured. I mean, that was just class, that pop for me, like watching it for the first time. I don't know about, obviously you guys were younger. I can't imagine there was too many sort of I don't know how you guys really found out about your rumours sort of thing, or I wonder if this guy's going to be coming back or bloody blah. I know obviously you might just get, but so that's, first of all, that was one of my main takeaways as to how great the Warrior return was, and just how good it is when stuff's not pre-announced, there's not rumours not flying around all over the internet. So love that. Randy Savage again, just Randy Savage and Bret Hart, how great these two were is just, and that's not, and even while Ric Flair and Roddy Piper you can put in there, those two matches were just absolutely incredible. Again, it makes you just sort of say about title matches at WrestleMania. They are I know I'm kind of contradicting myself in a way here, that they should have. I mean, the WWE title should have always main event. It should always main event WrestleMania. But just the emotion from both superstars, the crowd getting into it. You just want it to go. You want it to be like that these days, where that is just what, even if it's an IC title match, just the passion of trying to win a title belt.
It would have been a better story if they had the world title match on last, and then the Ultimate Warrior came out and helped Savage, because the Ultimate Warrior retired Savage the year before.
Yeah, and of course the Ultimate Warrior and Savage faced each other at the next pay-per-view SummerSlam at Wembley, didn't they? So that would have built up towards that, the next title match.
Hogan didn't look happy that he had to share the end of the show with Warrior. So I'm sure he wasn't. So.
No. But there we go, gents. We've covered WrestleMania 8. This kind of like retro review on WrestleMania Wrestling with Johners. But I just want to thank you both so much for being special guests on this episode of Wrestling with Johners. Before we let you go, this is an opportunity for you to kind of throw out any plugs, any social media handles where my listeners can reach out and say hi, learn more about the Broken But Glorious podcast, and tell us a bit about where we can find your content and where we can get hold of you too and your podcast on social media.
So you can find me, I'm Chris Lappin BBG on Twitter. Nick is Nick_Davey.
Hello.
You find our podcast is BBGWPod on Twitter. Our main network hub is BBG Wrestling on Twitter. Our website is bbgwrestling.com. You can find us on all your podcasts. What's it called? Platforms. You can find us. Yeah, we're on iTunes. We're on Spotify. We're on SoundCloud. We haven't made it to YouTube or anything yet. We're just purely an audio podcast. Yeah, and then, I'll say a couple of weeks I've got interviews with Royce Isaacs from NWA. I'm interviewing him tonight. Interview with Shreddy Breck, the brilliant Shreddy Breck. He's a brilliant British wrestler. He's funny, a really funny guy. It's just typical Geordie. It's meant to be a half-hour interview. It's 50-odd minutes because he's so funny. And then next week and MLW's Richard Halliday. Oh, I'm really looking forward to seeing him because he's currently in a stable with MJF, part of the Dynasty. It should be a really fun interview. And go back and check out our back catalogue of interviews as well, because we've got Brian Cage, we've got Michael Elgin, Eli Drake, Jordan Grace, Nathan Cruz. Oh God, there's loads of people.
You're just showing off now. You're just showing off now.
I'll literally interview anyone, because I interviewed a guy called Charlie recently. He's only had 3 matches, but it was one of the most fun interviews I've done in ages. I'll literally interview world champions, guys who are just starting out, podcasters, referees.
Fantastic.
I'm just really interested in why people wrestle. That's the most thing I'm mainly interested in, is why they wrestle.
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Nick. We'll make sure that all of your Twitter addresses and handles are added to the description of this podcast episode, so that my listeners can just click into the description of this week's episode and click on the various handles and say hi to Chris and Nick and tune into the Broken but Glorious Wrestling podcast. So thank you to Chris. Thank you to Nick once again. So please keep it tuned to the Wrestling with Johners podcast. And if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, please don't forget to spread the word. Tell your friends and tell your family. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on a single episode of the Wrestling with Johners podcast. Once again, thank you to the guys from Broken but Glorious Wrestling podcast. Thanks to everybody for listening. Take care. Have a great weekend, and we'll catch up with you all again soon.